Good evening. How are you? That was Baruch Chait singing his song Es Tzemach David. I think the album is called Coming Home, and Baruch Chait is singing with the Jerusalem Echoes, an old album. How's everybody doing? I apologize that I was late. We broadcast live earlier today when we did our annual pre-Shavuos reading of the book of Ruth, and we were live on both Facebook and YouTube. And then I don't know what happened with YouTube. I wasn't able to sign back in for this evening's show, and then you would have, heard me grumbling, angrily exclaiming, "What's wrong with this thing?" But luckily, I was able to log out, log in, whatever. I mean, no one wants to hear the particulars, but it's always something with these algorithms, etc. All right. We seem to be live, just double checking that we're live on YouTube as well. So I think everything is okay. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. See, I need an IT department, right? I've been wearing too many hats. Okay. Who is with us on a Thursday evening? Shabbos is almost here. Shavuos is almost here. Sharon with us from New Jersey. James in Indianapolis. Pauline in Chicagoland. Paula in the north suburbs of Chicago. Melissa in Great Neck. Bill in mid-Missouri. Renee in Indiana. The other Paula in the Great Northwest. Lucy in Minnesota. Stephen in New Hampshire. Just back from a bike race. 4th place. Nice. Well done, Stephen. Bella in Florida, David in Indiana, Ann in Merced. Pauline enjoyed our reading of the book of Ruth. Yonason in Chicago, Stephen in Oklahoma. Linda's doing great. Melissa says, "I wear my hats well." You're very kind. Aoife in Florida, and Ms. Michelle saying shalom, shalom. Welcome, everybody. All right. Tonight, we are concluding Chapter 9 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. Our daf is Pei Zion, page 87, but we picked this up at the bottom of 86b. Mishnah number 3, the final Mishnah of Chapter 9. An Israelite woman married to a priest may partake of teruma. All right, that's basic. We've encountered that concept many times. No one can eat teruma except a priest and their families. So a woman who was the daughter of Yisrael, she couldn't eat teruma until she married the priest. Could she eat teruma when she was betrothed to the priest? No. Could she eat teruma if she was pregnant by the priest but not married to him? No. But when she's fully married to him, now she can eat teruma. If the priest dies, she returns to her father's house. She can't eat teruma anymore. If they divorce, she can't eat teruma anymore. But if she has a child by the priest, now she has a son and that son, I think in fact, it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. I believe, I'm not sure about that. But certainly if she has a son by the priest, now she's the mother of a priest. Boom, she can still eat teruma. Let's continue the Mishnah. An Israelite woman married to a priest may partake of teruma. If the priest died and she has a child from him, she may continue to partake of teruma. So seemingly, whether she has a son of a priest who is a priest himself or a daughter of a priest as her child, even if the priest died, she may still eat teruma. If she subsequently married a Levite, she may no longer partake of teruma, but she may partake of the first tithe on his account. Like the second Mishnah of this chapter, eating the tithe that's set aside for Levites, according to the halacha, anyone can eat that food, but only a priest or a priest's family is given the tithe as their possession. So she may partake of the tithe while she's married to a Levite. But now she may know, if she was the wife of a priest, he died, now she marries a Levite, so she may partake of the Levite's tithe, but she may no longer eat teruma. If he too died, the Levite, if he died and she had a child from him, So she may continue to partake of the tithe on account of the child. If she then married a Yisrael, so she may partake neither of teruma nor of the Levite's tithe. If her Israelite husband died and she had a child from him, she still may not partake of teruma or the Levite's tithe. But if her child from the Yisrael also died while her son from the Levite remained alive, she may partake of the tithe on account of the Levite's child. If her child from the Levite died, leaving her with a son from the priest, she may once again partake of teruma. If her child from the priest died as well, she may no longer partake of either teruma or tithe. The law, just checking it. The daughter of an Israelite or Levite who is married to a priest may partake of teruma, even if she is younger than 3 years and 1 day old, and therefore she has certainly not yet consummated the marriage. Doesn't matter whether she consummated, but she's married to him, she can partake of teruma. If he died, if the daughter of a Yisrael who has a child from a priest is permitted to partake of teruma on account of her child, whether her child is a son, a daughter, a person whose sexual organs are concealed, or an androgynous, who has both sexual organs of a male and a female. Either way, she may partake of teruma on account of this child of the priest. If her child from the Israelite also died while her son from the Levite remained alive, she may partake of the tithe on account of the Levite's child. If her child from the Levite died, leaving her with a son from a priest, she may once again partake of teruma. If her child from the priest died as well, she may no longer partake of either teruma or tithe. Continuing the Mishnah. Now we're on 87a. The daughter of a priest married to a Yisrael may not partake of teruma. She could partake of teruma when she lived in her father's house, who was a priest. She marries a Yisrael, she can no longer eat teruma. If the Yisrael died and she has a son from the Yisrael, she still may not partake of teruma as long as that son is alive. If she subsequently married a Levite, she may partake of the tithe. If he died and she had a son from him, she may still partake of the tithe. If she subsequently married a priest, she may partake of teruma. If the priest died and she had a son from him, she may still partake of teruma. If her son from the priest also died, she may not partake of teruma, but she may partake of the tithe because she has a son from the Levite. If her son from the Levite died, she may no longer partake of the tithe. If her son from the Israelite, from the Yisrael died, she returns to her father's house. She's the daughter of a priest, so she may once again partake of teruma. And with regard to this woman, it is stated in Leviticus 22:13, and she is returned unto her father's house as in her youth, and she may eat of her father's bread, meaning she may once again eat teruma. Right? The daughter of a priest marries someone who's not a priest, she may no longer eat teruma. If he dies, as long as she doesn't have a child by that non-priest, she returns to her father's house and can eat teruma again. But if she has a child from a non-priest, she takes the status of that child and she still cannot eat teruma. That was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah, if her son from the Levite died, she may partake of teruma. And the Gemara asks, this law, with regard to a woman previously married to a priest who had a child from the priest and was then married to a Levite and separated from him, that she may once again partake of teruma due to her son from the priest, from where do we derive this? Rabbi Abba said that Rav said. It states, Leviticus 22:13, but if a priest's daughter be a widow or divorced and have no child and is returned unto her father's house as in her youth, that's when she can once again partake of teruma because she's living in her father's house. But if she comes back with a child from the non-priest, that's when she cannot eat teruma. So the verse could have stated, if a priest's daughter. Instead, it states, but if a priest's daughter, with an extra word represented by the single Hebrew letter vav at the beginning of the word, the prefix, which can mean and or but. But in any case, it seems that it was unnecessary, and so they're going to interpret a law from this additional word. The Gemara asks, in accordance with the opinion of which sage is this exposition? Is it only in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, who expounds the additional letter vav, meaning and or but, at the beginning of a word, and he derives meanings and will find laws in these additional terms? Is he the only one who does that? Now, the Gemara refutes this suggestion. It can be understood even if you say it is in accordance with the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, who do not interpret additional laws from a vav at the beginning of a word, meaning and or but. Because in this case, the entire phrase, but if a priest's daughter, is superfluous, as the previous verse had already specified that we are dealing here with the daughter of a priest. We already knew that. Therefore, to repeat that this law applies to a priest's daughter leaves that phrase, a priest's daughter, open to interpretation or to derive an additional law. And therefore, everyone agrees that in this context, the additional letter in the text comes to include the additional case. The sages taught, with regard to the daughter of a priest, when she returns to her father's house, after having been married to a non-priest, and then she separates from her husband, she doesn't have a child from him, she returns to her father's house, now she can eat teruma once again, but she may not eat of the breast and the right hind leg of peace offerings, right? When the temple is standing and people bring peace offerings, a portion of which goes up in smoke on the altar as a gift to God, and a portion of which is given to the priests, the right hind leg and the breast. That meat, which is given to the priest, it's a very holy food, right? Even of a higher sanctity than teruma. Teruma is the first 2% of the produce in the field. When the temple is standing, that's given as a gift to priests. They have to eat it in purity. Both the teruma and the priest must be pure. But the portion of actual offerings that go up on the altar, which is given to priests, that's considered of an even higher sanctity than teruma. And the daughter of a priest may eat that when she's growing up in her father's house. When she marries outside of the priesthood and then is divorced or separated from that non-priest husband, and she returns to her father's house, she may once again eat teruma, but she may not eat of the priestly portion of the sacrificial offerings. How do we know that? Rav Chisda said that Ravina Bar Shela said, what is the verse that teaches us this law? Leviticus 22:12. She may not eat of that which is set apart from the sacred things. And this verse indicates from that which is separated from the sacred things, i.e. offerings, and given to a priest. From that she may not eat. So Rav Nachman said that Rabba Bar Avu said that this law comes from a different source. We infer from the words, she may eat of her father's bread when she returns to her father's house. Her father's bread, this refers to teruma. But the holy things, the priestly portions of the sacred offerings of that, she may not eat. And so we exclude the breast and the right hind leg. Rami Bar Chama objects to this interpretation. But we can say that the verse comes to exclude something different. What? Nullification of vows. The Torah would consequently be teaching us that even after she is returned unto her father's house, as in her youth, in Leviticus 22:13, she returns and she eats teruma. What does she not do? What status has she not regained when she returns to her father's house? The idea that her father can nullify her vows. The Torah makes allowance that when certain women make a vow, that vow can be nullified. This is actually a leniency that benefits her. That if she takes a vow in the midst of emotion and says, I vow never to do such and such, like I vow never to eat apples again. She shouldn't have said that, but she did say it. Now she's going to be held to it unless that vow is nullified. Most people, who are not a woman living in her father's house or a wife living in her husband's house, if they take such a vow, they're going to be held to it unless they have it nullified by a sage. The sage can nullify her vows a person's vow by establishing that if the person had known when they took the vow what would actually be implied by that vow, they would say, well, no, I never would have vowed that if I realized what the impact of that vow at the time I was making it. So a sage can nullify the vow. But a woman has this extra out that if her father is alive and she's living in her father's house, or she's married and she's living in her husband's house, that they can nullify the vow for her. But this priest's daughter who left her priest's house, married someone else, and then came back, perhaps she can no longer have her father nullify her vows for her. This is what Rami Bar Chama is saying. That verse comes to exclude nullification of vows. The Torah would consequently be teaching us that even after she is returned unto her father's house as in her youth, she does not return to her youth in all ways, as her father may not nullify her vows. Rava said the connection between her and her father's house with regard to vows has already been severed. We don't need this particular verse to teach us that. It was taught by the school of Rabbi Yishmael, as the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, but the vow of a widow or of a divorcee shall stand against her. She's like a man in that regard. She can't get the benefit of having her father or her husband nullify her vow for her. What is the meaning when the verse states this? She was removed from the category of one who was under the authority of her father when she married, and she has likewise been removed from the category of one who is under the authority of her husband, as she is no longer married to him, and she's got to deal with her vows herself. If she needs it nullified, she's going to have to go to a sage to do that. Rather, the verse is referring to a case where the father transferred his daughter to her husband's agents for the purpose of marriage, and she consequently left her father's house. So now we're talking about something a little bit more complicated. When has a woman left her father's house and entered her husband's house? When she gets married. That seems pretty simple, right? On the day she gets married, she leaves her father's house and now she's living in her husband's house. But what if there were some in-between steps, like her husband's agents, her husband appointed agents to travel to, like Abraham, right, appointed Eliezer to go find a wife for Yitzhak, and he came back with Rivka. So in that case, when Abraham's agent Eliezer took Rivka from her father's house and from her brother's house, Lavan, and was bringing her back so that she could marry Yitzhak, at what point has she left her father's house? Is it when she actually marries Yitzhak, or is it when her husband's agent comes to fetch her, as it were? So here, perhaps we're talking about a case where the father transferred his daughter to the husband's agents for the purpose of marriage, and so she consequently left her father's house. Or perhaps it is referring to a case where the father's agents transferred her to the husband's agents, and she was widowed or divorced on the way before she arrived at her husband's house. So how shall I consider her? Is she in the house of this one, her father, or is she in the house of that one, her husband? So rather, this verse comes to tell you, since she has entirely left her father's jurisdiction, when she was transferred to the husband's agents, even if just for one moment, her father is no longer able to nullify her vows. So we learn from here that a father cannot annul his daughter's vows after she has been married, and there is no need for an additional verse to teach us this law. Rav Safra said the law that she does not return to her father's house with regard to the breast and right hind leg, the priestly parts of sacrificial offerings, it's derived from the verse, from her father's bread she may eat, which indicates that a woman who was a priest's daughter, married a non-priest, that marriage ended through death or divorce, she returns to her father's house. What may she eat? Her father's bread. And from this we learn she may eat his teruma, but not the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. Rav Papa said a different interpretation. From her father's bread she may eat. This is referring to bread owned by her father, like teruma, which is the property of the priest, and it excludes the breast and the right hind leg, as the priests receive their portion from the table of the Most High. It's not their property, right? Teruma is a tithe, the first 2% of produce is given to the priests. It becomes their property. We know that because they may only eat it when they are pure and the teruma is pure, but if the teruma is impure or the priest is impure, they may still burn the teruma and benefit from its light, right? If it's a teruma, the teruma takes the form of olive oil and it's impure, so they can't eat it, but they can put it in a in a lamp, put a wick in there and burn it and benefit from the light. Why? Because it's their own property. If it was property that belonged to the Most High, belonged to the temple, for example, then they could not benefit from its light, because you can never benefit personally from something that is consecrated to God. Offerings are consecrated to the Most High, to God, when they're offered on the altar. A portion of that offering goes to the priests, but it doesn't become their property, as it were. It's a gift from God to the priests. They're able to eat it. That's all they're able to do with it. So unlike teruma, the breast and right hind leg do not belong to the priest. Rather, after the offering is sacrificed to God, they eat these portions as a gift from God, but they are not considered to be the owners of those portions. And Rav has said, it states, and the breast of waving and the hind leg of heaving you shall eat, you and your sons and your daughters with you. Leviticus 10:14. And this indicates that daughters of priests may eat at a time when they are with you. But once they have left the priest's domain, for example, by marrying an ordinary Israelite, they may no longer partake of these gifts, even if they subsequently return to the household, to the priest's household. Rav Ada bar Ahava said, it was taught with regard to the daughter of a priest, when she returns to her father's house, after marrying and separating from her husband without a child, she returns for the purposes of eating teruma, but she does not return for the purposes of eating the breast and right hind leg. By contrast, if an Israelite woman ate on account of her son from a priest, if she later married an Israelite and he died, she returns to partake even of the breast and right hind leg. This is fascinating because that, in fact, is the halacha. That is the law. So let's think about that for 1 second. A priest's daughter can eat teruma in her father's house, and she can eat the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. If she goes and marries a non-priest, and that marriage ends, and she returns to her father's house, she may once again eat teruma, but she may not eat the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. If a priest's daughter, or it doesn't even matter if it's a priest's daughter, if any woman was married to a priest, and she ate teruma on account of her husband, and then he died, she may no longer eat teruma. But if she had a child by the priest, then she may continue to eat teruma and the sacrificial, the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. So she has this child by the priest. Then she goes and marries a Yisrael. Now she can no longer eat teruma or the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. Then her second husband, the Yisrael, dies. So she resumes her status as the mother of a priest, or even the mother of a priestly daughter, and she can now eat teruma and the priest portion of sacrificial offerings. The mother of a priest regains that status, right? The daughter of a priest doesn't regain that status. It's an interesting contradiction, and it almost, makes us think, well, I guess it kind of makes sense because, we give extra kavod, extra honor to our parents, right? Thou shalt honor thy mother and father. And so a mother of a priest has a privilege that the daughter of a priest does not have, that the daughter of a priest does not have. Okay. Rav Mordecai went and stated this law before Rav Ashi, who said to him, from where does he include the case of a woman who partakes of teruma on account of her son? From the verse, but if a priest's daughter. Now, is the Israelite woman preferable to her, the daughter of a priest herself, who does not return to eating the breast and hind leg? And the Gemara answers, there, the Torah writes exclusions, as we learned above, that when she returns to her father's house, she eats his teruma, but not the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. But here, with regard to a woman who eats teruma and sacrificial offerings, priestly portions of sacrificial offerings on account of her son, she loses that privilege when she marries a Yisrael. That marriage ends. She regains her status as the mother of a priest, and there are no exclusions mentioned in the Torah such that she resumes the status to eat both teruma and the priestly portions of sacrificial offerings. The Torah doesn't exclude her from that, and so she regains that status. New subject. The Gemara returns to our Mishnah. The Mishnah taught the daughter of a priest married to a Yisrael may not partake of teruma. Got it? The sages taught, and she is returned unto her father's house. This excludes a widow awaiting her Yavam. We saw that, right? So a widow of a priest who returned, or the widow of a Yisrael, she returns to her father's house, and now she can eat teruma again. Got it? But the widow of this Yisrael, if she's a Yevama, right, awaiting her Yavam, meaning her husband, the Yisrael, died without a child, without having fathered a child, and he had a brother, right? So this is a Yibum situation. So until she performs Chalitza with the brother of the Yisrael, who would be a Yisrael also, she does not regain the ability to eat teruma in her father's house. If she performs Yibum with that Yavam, so now she's again married to a Yisrael, so she doesn't regain the right to eat teruma. If she performs Chalitza, now she's done with that family, returns to her father's house, and she can eat teruma again. And how do we know that? For she cannot go back to her father's house as long as she is still waiting for the Yavam to perform levirate marriage. As in her youth, this also excludes a pregnant woman. If the Yisrael died but left her pregnant, and she goes back to her father's house, the priest, she still can't eat teruma because she's pregnant by Yisrael. But could this not be derived from a kal v'chomer inference, an a fortiori inference, without the need for a special exposition of a verse? If in a place, i.e., in a case where the Torah did not make the law pertaining to a child from the first husband like the law pertaining to a child from the second husband to exempt her from levirate marriage. And what are we talking about? This is the case of a woman who married a man, had a son with him, she was widowed, she remarried, and her second husband died childless. Now, the fact that she had a child from her first husband is irrelevant to the case of her second husband because he never had a child. What makes her a Yevama, and she has a brother-in-law who stands as her Yavam from the second husband, is that he never had a child. The fact that she had a child by her first husband is irrelevant to the Yibum status of her second husband in that situation. So she requires levirate marriage despite the fact that she has a child, as the first husband's child is irrelevant with regard to her need for levirate marriage from the second husband. Despite this limitation, the Torah made the status of a fetus like that of a child who was born, as a pregnant woman does not perform Yibum, and a pregnant woman does not resume eating teruma in her father's house if her father was a priest. So that's a situation where the fetus, acts like a born child. Right? We're not talking, this has nothing to do with abortion. This has nothing to do with whether the fetus is an actual child or not. The fact is that in this body of law, the fact that she has a fetus from the Yisrael prevents her from entering into Yibum, and it prevents her from eating teruma again. So if this is so, then in a place where the Torah did make the law pertaining to a child from the first husband, like the law pertaining to a child from the second husband, to disqualify her from teruma, so this is the case of a daughter of a priest who married a Yisrael. She had a son with him. She was widowed, and afterwards she married another Yisrael who died childless. She may not partake of teruma on account of her son from the first husband. Right? The son from the first husband has no impact on whether she performs Yibum when she's widowed from the second husband. But the son from the first husband does have an impact on whether or not she can eat teruma in her father's household. So is it not therefore right that we should make a fetus like a child who was born with regard to teruma that would prevent her from returning to partake of teruma if she is pregnant? If this reasoning is correct, so then there's no need for the biblical exposition. However, this proof can be refuted. No. What I would say is that the Torah made a fetus like a child who was already born with regard to Yibum, because with regard to Yibum, the Torah made the dead like the living. If the woman had a child at the time of her husband's death, she is entirely exempt from Yibum, even if her son subsequently died. The deceased child is like a living one in the sense that he continues to exempt his mother from Yibum. Shall we then make a fetus like a child who was born with regard to Teruma, where the Torah did not make the dead like the living? Right? The fact that she has a child from a Yisrael means that she can't return to her father's house and eat Teruma there. But if that child dies, then she can return to her father's house and eat Teruma. As opposed to in the Yibum situation, if that man had a child with her, then when he dies, she does not stand for Yibum with his brother. Even if the child subsequently dies, the fact that the man who died had a child at all, whether it lived or died, exempts her from Yibum. So you see that the law of Yibum is different than the law of returning to eat Teruma with regard to whether a baby was born or not, whether the baby survived or not. We're still talking about, that a child changes her status, but the analogy breaks down because the law has different outcomes. So, in the case of Teruma, as long as the daughter of a priest has a living son from her Israelite husband, she's disqualified from Teruma. But if he dies, she may partake of Teruma again, as we do not consider him like a living son. Consequently, we cannot learn the law of Teruma from the law of levirate marriage with regard to the status of a fetus. Therefore, the verse states, as in her youth, to exclude a pregnant woman. We need the law to actually state that. We couldn't have learned it by analogy between the two kinds of law. Now the Gemara comments, and it was necessary to write this verse that teaches the law of a pregnant woman, and it was necessary to write, and she have no child, because in Leviticus 22:13, because had the merciful one written only, and she have no child, I would have said that at the outset she was only one body when she ate teruma, and now upon her return there are two bodies. She comes back with a child, and that is why she is no longer as in her youth. But a pregnant woman who at the outset was one body, and now she is still one body, one might say that she may partake of teruma until the birth of her son. Consequently, it is necessary for a verse to teach the law that a pregnant woman may not eat teruma in her father's house. And vice versa, had the merciful one written the law with regard to a pregnant woman, I might have said that this is true only of a pregnant woman because at the outset her body was empty and now her body is full with the child, and therefore she is no longer as in her youth. But in a situation where she has no child, when at the outset her body was empty and now her body is also empty and she has given birth, you might say that she should not be disqualified. Therefore, it is necessary to write both verses. Parenthetically, the Gemara lists terms, now we're on 87b, the Gemara lists terms signifying the following discussions to serve as a mnemonic device. So this series of phrases seems to make no sense, but it's really just spelled out as reminders. Said to him, we should not make, by death, we should make and not make, by a child, yavam and teruma, levirate marriage and teruma. This list of terms taken from the introductions or key phrases in each of the ensuing discussions is the mnemonic device to help us remember. Remember that all of this material at one time was memorized, right? Imagine the huge brains of our sages, that everything that we're reading, and it just seems so overwhelming that we can't even remember what we've, like the content of what we've learned. Imagine that our sages would memorize all these passages, the exact wording. Now, it was shorter than what I'm reading to you because this is elucidated by Rav Steinsaltz. There's a lot of extra words so that we can understand what they're talking about. But nevertheless, it's not that much shorter that it would be easy, to memorize all of these Gemaras. At any rate, Rav Yehuda from Deis Karta said to Rava, in continuation of the discussion of our Baraisa, should we not make the halacha, the law, concerning dead children like the law concerning living children with regard to yibum, to levirate marriage? by the Kal V'chomer inference and say, and if in a place where the Torah made the law with regard to a child from the first husband, like the law with regard to a child from the second husband, to disqualify her from eating teruma in her father's house, for as long as she has a child who is not a priest, she's prohibited from partaking of teruma, no matter whether it was a child of the first marriage or the second marriage. So, and nevertheless, the Torah did not make the dead children like living ones. Therefore, in a place where the Torah did not make a child from the first marriage like a child from the second to exempt her from Yibum, is it not right that we should not make the dead like the living? Why then is a Yevama exempt from Yibum if her late husband's only child dies? Right? So what we're saying is, in the case of teruma, so she has a child, she was a priest's daughter, and she had a child by Yisrael, so now she can't eat teruma. But if that child dies, then she can once again eat teruma in her father's house. But in the law of Yibum, if she had a child by her husband, then he did not die childless, and she's not subject to Yibum, even if that child dies. And so what they're asking is, why wouldn't we make these cases the same? Why wouldn't we produce the same outcome, that if the child dies, then she should have to produce Yibum, so that the husband who died would be left with a living heir? Not the fact that he had a child but then it died. Shouldn't that say, well, no, now we kick in the Yibum requirement so that we have a chance to produce a living heir? But the law is not like that. Now the verse states, Proverbs 3:17, her ways are the ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace, meaning the Torah. In other words, since the ways of Torah are those of pleasantness, the Torah would not obligate a woman who has married in the meantime to subsequently perform chalitza, as this might demean her in her husband's eyes. So the Gemara inquires, in other words, if this woman had a child when her first husband died, so there's no Yibum. So now she could go and marry some other man as her second husband. She can't marry her brother-in-law, but she could marry some other guy. But then if that child died and we were to reinstate the Yibum obligation, so then we would require her to perform chalitza with the brother of her first husband, even though she's already married to this other guy. And the fact that she has to go perform chalitza with that brother after she already married a new guy might demean her in the eyes of her new husband, so that we don't create that obligation. Now the Gemara inquires, well, and let us make the law with regard to dead children like the law with regard to living ones, with regard to teruma, from a Kal V'chomer inference. So we can't make the law of Yibum like the law of teruma. Maybe we should make the law of teruma like the law of Yibum. And if in a place where the Torah did not make a child from the first husband like the child from a second to exempt her from Yibum, it nevertheless made the living like the dead, as a woman whose husband died and left a child is exempt from levirate marriage, even if that child subsequently dies. Well then, in a place where the Torah made a child from the first like a child from the second to disqualify her from teruma, is it not right that we should make the living like the dead? And the Gemara responds, therefore the verse states, and she have no child. She is returned unto her father's house, as in her youth. And here she does not currently have children. So the Gemara further suggests, and let us make her child from the first husband like the child from the second one, with regard to Yibum, again from a Kal V'chomer inference. And if in a place where the Torah did not make the living like the dead with regard to teruma, it nevertheless still made a child from her first husband like a child from the second, then in a place where it made the living like the dead with regard to Yibum, is it not right that we should make a child from the first husband like a child from the second, and thereby exempt her from levirate marriage? And the Gemara answers, the verse precludes this understanding because it states about levirate marriage, and he has no child. And in fact, he had none at the time of his death. So the Gemara offers another possibility, right? What they're doing is sort of using process of elimination to rule out all alternative, laws than the one that we've derived as the law, but they're sort of double checking that they derived the law properly. And so the Gemara offers another possible way the law could have come out. And should we make a child from the first husband not like a child from the second one with regard to teruma from a kal v'chomer inference. If in a place where the Torah made the living like the dead to exempt her from yibum, it still did not make a child from the first husband like a child from the second, then in a place where the Torah did not make the living like the dead, with regard to teruma, is it not right that we should not make the child from the first husband like the child from the second? And the Gemara responds, therefore the verse states, and she have no child. But in fact, this woman has children. And that concludes chapter 9. And with God's help, we will gather again to open chapter 10 tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. I'll just mention now that then we're going to have to miss a few days of class. We'll have class tomorrow on Friday, but the Saturday night class that we would normally have can't do it because Shavuos begins Saturday night. Then we're not going to have a Sunday class because it's still Shavuos. And then we're not going to have a Monday class because it's still Shavuos. We theoretically could have a class Monday night after Shavuos ends the way we do on Saturday nights, but that's a weeknight. And for the people on the East Coast, it's going to end up being like 1 a.m. when you can finally have the class, so no good. Right? So after tomorrow, we won't meet again until the regular weekday time on Tuesday, which would be 6 p.m. Okay, let's see if we've got questions or comments on Yevamos 87. Sharon says, if she was pregnant by a priest, doesn't that make her married de facto to a priest? Now, that's a great question, right? Don't we have the basic teaching that people, if two Jews are unmarried and they have sex with each other, they're married, right? They're de facto married. Yes, but as we've seen, a woman who's pregnant by a priest does not begin eating teruma until they're actually married. They have to stand under the chuppah for her to start eating teruma. And the fact that they got pregnant together before they got married, she's penalized for that essentially because it was licentious behavior. They should not have sought to create their marriage by having sex before they were actually married. Ms. Michelle Rice, I understand the law. My only confusion is where the teaching regarding how one's lineage is determined through the mother. Right, well, not lineage, whether you're Jewish or not, right? That's what's determined through the mother. Lineage is determined through the father. Right, and so that goes all the way back to when we had tribal identity. As well as being a member of the Jewish people, you were also a member of a tribe. You know, you could be a Benjamite or a Danite, right, or a Yissakarite or a Zebulonite, and that would come from your father. The tribal identities were all lost, except for the Levium, right? The only ones who know what tribe they're a member of are the Levium, the Levites, and then that subgroup, the priests, because you're a priest if your father was a priest and he married a Jewish woman. Because I think if a priest has a child by a non-Jewish woman, that child is not a priest because that child is not a Jew. It goes after the mother. Where there's flawed lineage, it goes after the one who has the flawed lineage. So that's how, and when did they actually make that ruling? We've encountered that before. It's not really what we're talking about today, but how did the sages actually derive? I just don't have it at the tip of my tongue. But the bottom line is, you're born a Jew if your mother was a Jew. And if your mother was not a Jew, then you're not a Jew. But you're a Levite or a priest if your father was a Levite or a priest. Okay, that's all that I've got for today. I think that's all the questions that were passed to me. I see there's some rich discussion going on in the comments. I can't really follow it, just catching up quickly, but I see that Sharon is mentioning about our tour Shik. And earlier when we did the reading from the book of Ruth, we showed the Shik illustrations from that book. And if you've seen our movie, When Do We Eat? Then you've seen an illustration from the Shik Haggadah. And you can Google this and see all the other illustrations, especially from the Schick Haggadah. They're just incredible. Artur Schick was a really stunning artist, a Polish illustrator who fled Poland as the Nazis came in. And so this recent, new Polish immigrant to America somehow got noticed quickly, and he ended up becoming Roosevelt's propagandist against the Nazis through his cartoons and illustrations. I'm not sure exactly what you guys are talking about, but it's always good to mention Artur Schick. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together tomorrow to open chapter 10.